How many choices, decisions, do you think that you make in a single day? 10, 100, 1,000? When you think back, I want you to think back for a moment, the very beginning of your day, today. What was the first decision, first choice that you made? You gonna hit snooze, not hit snooze? It's Sunday, no one has their alarm set, I don't think. They shouldn't if they do. Are you gonna make a cup of coffee? Are you gonna have tea? You're gonna have a soda, a water? Is it ice water? There are studies that say we make 35,000 choices each and every day, which would equate to about, as long as I've just been talking, you should have made about 25 choices. Now, be honest, I'm not going to make you raise your hand, but did you just get a text, a notification? Did you look at it? Did you respond? Did you think about dinner? Or you think, I just saw Wes, why is he not up here? Do I want to listen to this guy? Who is he? But really, what should I have for dinner? I'm getting kind of hungry. You know, we make 35,000 decisions each and every day. A kid makes about 3,000. I know that may seem like an insane amount of choices, but 227 of them are about food alone. For some of us, it's a few more than that. And if you weren't thinking about food, I'm sure you are now. We make a lot of choices, a lot of decisions. Over the next few weeks, we're going to be talking about a few men and women from the Old Testament, from the Bible. We're going to kick it back old school. I don't know if you listen to Nirvana, but I heard they play on classic rock now. And if that doesn't make you feel old, then I don't know what will. But old school faith, men and women of the Old Testament, of the Bible, who had unshakable faith. One of them made some pretty pivotal decisions, some key choices. And whenever I like to think about choices that we make, I think of dominoes. I don't know if you were like me as a kid. I'll say sometimes even now, not too often. But to make a train of dominoes. Have you ever made those? You put a domino after a domino after a domino after a domino, and you get like 10 deep, and they accidentally fall over, right, every time. Whenever I was a kid, I would play with dominoes all the time. We would try to make all of these elaborate loops around the house. They're going to be awesome, inevitably, until someone knocks it over, someone kicks something over. But we would play with dominoes. And the reason whenever I think about the choices that we make, it's a lot like a train of dominoes. That is, the choice we make today has an impact on our tomorrow. And when we consider choices, the choices that we make shape who we are, what we do, and where we go. I'll say that again. The choices that we make shape who we are, what we do, and where we go. Choices, like dominoes, depend on one another, the good and the bad. And you made a choice today, a choice to be here. Maybe someone made the choice for you, but someone made the choice and you're here. And I believe that that could be the stepping stone to your future. Not because of the magic words I'm going to say, because of what God shows us through the book of Ruth that we're going to take a look at today. If you have your Bible, you can open it up to Ruth chapter 1, Old Testament, right after the book of Judges. In the book of Ruth, we see this incredible woman. Her name means friendship. That's one interesting thing about the Old Testament. As we see all the different names in the Old Testament, a lot of times those have symbolic meaning. They go a little bit deeper than just the name at the surface. Ruth, friendship. And in the book of Ruth, we see someone who makes all of these pivotal choices, pivotal decisions in her life that starts a train of dominoes. It leads somewhere incredible, something that all of us are impacted by today. And in the book of Ruth, as we begin at the very start of it, it takes time during the period of the Judges. Now, when we consider the Old Testament over a long period of time, the period of the Judges is between Moses and David. So Moses about 1500 BC, David about 1000 BC, and in between that period of time was a terrible time for the people of Israel. It was the time of the Judges. You read about these different people that did not have a gavel and a robe, warrior-like people. They were called judges. Deborah, Samson, Gideon. These judges were ruling over this time. And in fact, as we jump into the book of Ruth, the very first verse says, "Now it came about in the days when the judges governed, that there was a famine in the land." Now, Ruth, immediately following after the book of Judges, when we consider the state of life during this period of time, we can look at the very last verse in the book of Judges. Judges chapter 21, verse 25 says, "In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes." Everyone made their own choices, their own decisions of what are they going to do? How are they going to live? Now, when you have a lot of people making their own decisions, probably not going to go very well. And that's what's happening during the time of the Judges. And as we consider this time period where people are making their own choices, decisions, plans for themselves, with no regard for anyone else, we say that there's this cycle. That these people sin, they do something wrong, the Israelites are against God, they sin against God. And as a result, there is judgment upon them. In the book of Ruth, that's the time they find themselves in. There's a famine on the land. There's no food. No grain is growing. They're in this time of judgment. So there's sin. They do these wrong things. And then there's this judgment. And after the judgment, once they face all of these difficult circumstances, they say, "Oh, God, I'm sorry." They repent. A lot like in our life. Feel the consequences, then we apologize. If you're married, you do this often. I do at least. And they repent. They turn away from their wrongdoing. They admit that they were wrong. And after that, there's a judge to come and make things right. The people that we read about in the book of Judges. And from the judge comes deliverance. Deliverance leads to peace. Peace leads to good times. But when things are good, what do? We sin again, and then we start all back over again. And in Judges, we see the cycle again and again and again. And in the book of Ruth, we find this time of famine, this hardship, this difficult period of time in the Bible. And so during this, as we continue in the book of Ruth, continue in verse 1, it says, "And a certain man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the land of Moab with his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife, Naomi. The names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion, Ephrates of Bethlehem in Judah. Now they entered in the land of Moab and remained there." Now those names, Mahlon and Chilion, literally means sickly and dying. That's what their names are. Wouldn't that be a great name? Like, I'm going to name my kid Sickly. And this one's going to be dying. And a lot of that you can consider at this time frame, again, famine. Sickly looking body, frail, mother not having the nutrients she needs. And they go to this land of Moab to try and escape this famine, to find food, to take care of their family. And as they go there, as we continue, verse 3, "Then Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died." That escalates really quick. He's there, and then he's gone. But Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They took for themselves Moabite women as wives. The name of the one was Orpah, meaning beauty of the neck, beautiful. Orpha. And the name of the other, Ruth, friendship. And they lived there about 10 years. Then both Mahlon and Chilion also died. The women were bereft of her two children and her husband. So they go to this foreign land trying to escape the famine, and her family dies. And so here Naomi is at a pivotal point in her life to make a decision, a choice. What am I going to do? In this time, if you don't have a husband or a family member that's male, you cannot make it by in society. You can't have any land, ownership of anything. You don't really work outside of the home. You have nothing. So Naomi decides she is going to tell her two daughter-in-laws, Orpha and Ruth, just go back home, find a relative that's going to take care of you. That is the choice, the decision that you should make. Because there is nothing for you with me. I've got nothing. And this is where Ruth steps in and does something bold. Makes a decision, makes a choice that's counter to what would be appropriate, counter to what would make sense, being faithful to a God that she had just met. We see in verse 16, Ruth chapter 1, verse 16, it says, "But Ruth said, 'Do not urge me to leave you or turn back from following you. For where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people. Your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus may the Lord do to me and worse, if anything but death parts you and me.'" Ruth makes a choice to leave everything she's ever known, everything she's ever seen. Because Naomi's going to travel back to her homeland in hopes of finding a relative that can help take care of her. And while Naomi tells Ruth, go back home, she says, no, I will go with you. She makes a choice. This is this God that I've learned about, that I've heard about with your family, Yahweh, the God of our Bible. He will be my God. I will make the decision to follow after you. Again, another choice that's pivotal in our life. As she heads to Bethlehem with Naomi, they go to this place where Naomi is recognized. They go back to her home. These people knew Naomi. She was from there. People that had recognized who she was. And they say, hey, is that Naomi? Naomi defeated, discouraged, with nothing and no one except for Ruth, her friend, her daughter-in-law that stayed true. Orpha, who stayed back home, but Ruth, who followed along with her. Naomi, is that you, Naomi? Name meaning pleasant, my pleasantness, literally. But she says in verse 21, she said to them, do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, meaning bitter. Why do you call me bitter? For the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went out full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why do you call me Naomi? Since the Lord has witnessed against me and the Almighty has afflicted me. Don't call me pleasant. Nothing about my life is pleasant. It's bitter. It's awful. The only one that stuck with me was Ruth. And here we are. I don't know what's going to happen. You can imagine in her life losing her husband, losing her two sons. Unbearable grief. Unsure how to handle it. Unsure what to do. So they settle in this area, trying to figure out what to do. Again, we don't have anything. We don't know really anyone that well. And here is Ruth again, making a pretty big decision. You see, Ruth is a foreigner. She's not from this place. She's never been there, but she is familiar with the customs of the place. And there's something during this time called gleaning in the fields. And so during this time frame, what would happen is people that didn't have anything, they were poor, they were orphans, they were widows, they would glean in these fields of barley, these fields of grain. What that means is they would pick up the leftovers. Now, I don't know if whenever you go to the grocery store and you get a bunch of bags of groceries and then you get to your house and you have one mission, and just carry every single grocery in on one trip, because no way can you take 2 trips, right? You pick them all up. You load it down, maybe a water you're holding on to. Look really cool. Well, gleaning in the barley field is essentially saying, okay, you can only hold so much, but there comes a point when you can't have as many. You have to leave something back. Well, to glean would be to get the leftovers, to get whatever is left. So someone would go by, they'd get all the grain from the field, pick up all their bags of groceries, they're walking in. Anything left is a goner. But it was a custom. To take care of the orphans, the widows, those that had nothing, they would go after those people and they would pick up everything that was left over. So all these scraps that are left over, they'd pick those up. And they could eat those. Those were for them to keep. And so during this time, Naomi and Ruth have nothing. But Ruth makes this decision, this choice, to do something to take care of her and Naomi. She chooses to go and glean in the barley field. To glean from a specific field. In chapter 2 of Ruth, starting in verse 1, now Naomi had a kinsman of her husband, a man of great wealth, of the family of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, please let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after one in whose sight I may find favor. She said to her, go, my daughter. So Ruth is saying, I'm making this choice, I'm making this decision while we have nothing, there's no one here for us to support us. You do have a relative. And maybe, just maybe, if I can meet him, if I can interact with him, he will help take care of us. So she makes a choice. She goes to glean in the field of Boaz. There she is, she's picking up that extra grain. Boaz notices her. Who is she? He asks the servants. Who's that in the field? They explain it's this Moabite woman that came with Naomi. You know Naomi. She wants to go by Mara now, but Naomi. Came with her, stayed loyal to her, stuck with her, even when she didn't have to, even whenever it was countercultural. So he sees her out there. And upon hearing about this faithfulness that Ruth had to Naomi, we see that they interact. Boaz and Ruth talk to each other. Verse 11, and Boaz replied to her, all that you have done for your mother-in-law after the death of your husband has been fully reported to me. How you left your father and your mother in the land of your birth and came to a people that you did not previously know. May the Lord reward your work and your wages be full from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to seek refuge. And Ruth, day after day, continues to get barley from this field, from a man named Boaz, who's letting her stay there to continue. Now, what's really important about Boaz as a relative is there was this person that'd be known as a kinsman redeemer. And that is, if someone in your family dies, it's the responsibility of another male in the family to take care of those women. Or if you've heard of a levirate marriage, there'd be a lever, a husband's brother. So if your brother dies, it's the responsibility of the closest sibling, the brother, to marry the wife to continue the family lineage. And so this kinsman redeemer would be someone that has the responsibility in the family to take care of the woman whose husband had died. And so whenever Ruth meets Boaz, Naomi is thinking about this, saying, oh, maybe he can be our Gaal, our kinsman redeemer, the one to redeem us, to take care of us, to be there for us. And it's in this moment that Ruth makes another decision, a choice, a super romantic choice. She gets all did up, best clothes, I don't know, that would be a dress, I guess. Her makeup on. She gets ready because she is going to pursue Boaz in a marriage proposal. And I'm telling you, this is about as romantic as it gets. But what she is supposed to do is she makes this choice. She's going to go and find Boaz while he's eating dinner, but she's not going to interact with him at dinner. She's going to hide and watch him. And he has no idea that she's there. And so she's just sitting there hiding, waiting for him to finish his meal. And then she's going to follow him to where he's sleeping. He still has no idea she's there. She's going to watch him some more. And not only that, once he falls asleep, the most romantic of gestures, she will gently uncover his feet and lay down at his foot of his bed. She makes a choice to do something bold. While that sounds odd to us today, that was akin to a marriage proposal in this levirate style. Uncover the feet, lay at the bed. It was understood of what that meant, what that was. But she makes this choice. She makes a decision that's all happening from previously. All the decisions she had made up to this point led to this decision. And as she is there, she comes up to Boaz and is asking him, I want you to be our kinsman redeemer. Will you marry me? Will you redeem the family? She makes that choice. As Boaz hears this, he knows there's actually one that is closer, one that has the right of the kinsman redeemer. He can't just pass this person up. He has to ask if he can take that place. And so as the story continues, we see Ruth chapter 4 says, Now Boaz went up to the gate and sat there. And behold, a close relative of whom Boaz spoke was passing by. So he said, Turn aside, friend. Sit down here. And he turned aside and sat down. He took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, Sit down here. So they sat down. He said to the closest relative, Naomi, who has come back from the land of Moab, has to sell the piece of land which belonged to our brother Elimelech. So I thought to inform you, saying, Buy it before those who are sitting here and before the elders of my people. If you redeem it, redeem it. But if not, tell me that I may know. For there is no one but you to redeem it, and I am after you. So I will be the one to redeem it after. And this close relative says, I will redeem it. And then Boaz said, verse 5, On the day that you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you must also acquire Ruth, the Moabitess, the widow of the deceased, in order to raise up the name of the deceased on his inheritance. The closest relative said, Well, I cannot redeem it for myself. He said, I'll take the land, but I'm not going to take the woman. I cannot redeem that for myself. Because I would jeopardize my own inheritance. Redeem it for yourself. You may have the right of redemption, for I cannot redeem it. So over the course of this story, we see that Ruth has made some decisions, some choices. What could seem big, the small independent choice that she made, a big choice, but a small one, just to stay with Naomi. She doesn't know what's going to happen. As she stays with Naomi, she decides she's going to do what she can. She's going to glean in the field. She's going to go up to Boaz. She's going to ask Boaz to be their kinsman redeemer. And from that, we see that Boaz does become the kinsman redeemer. that he redeems their family, that they get married. And what's so incredibly important about this story, and that impacts all of us today, is that these choices that were made, all depending upon one another. We know that after Ruth and Boaz get married, they have a son. They have a son named Obed. That son, Obed, has a son who has a son whose name is David. King David. David that you've probably heard about, that slayed Goliath. Choices are important, and we see with Ruth, she made a choice that may have seemed incremental, maybe not super significant. But as she continued to stay faithful to what she knew that God had for her, as she continued to seek after what God had in front of her, she got to be the great-grandma of David, King David, the leader of all of the Israelites. And I just wonder, if Ruth hadn't made her decisions, would we have a David? If Ruth hadn't been faithful when it was hard, when it was difficult, hadn't stayed true to what she knew that God had for her, what would the history of mankind look like? David, her great-grandson, has a child, who has a child, who has a child, who has a child. And as you track down the lineage, these decisions that Ruth made, that while they start small, get a little bit bigger, a little bit more impactful, a little bit more tangible. Because if you look at it, Ruth, if she's the great-grandma of David, that means she's the great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great 28 times over grandmother of Jesus, who God sent for you and for me. And because of these decisions to be faithful, to say, God, I don't know what's going to happen right now. I don't know what you want me to do, but I know that in this moment, in this decision that I'm making today, this is where you're guiding me. And as long as I'm faithful to that, you're going to continue to lead me to places that impact my tomorrow. You see, the same thing is true for us. As we make decisions after decisions, just like dominoes, the decision we make today, it impacts tomorrow. I just said earlier, we make 35,000 choices a day, some important, some not important, but I want you to consider the ones that maybe you've made, they were difficult. Unsure of what's going to happen next. Do I take this job? Do I stick with what I have now? Do I go on this trip? Do I stay here because I know what that might lead to? I'll just have one drink today. One decision. Knowing that's going to lead to more choices, more decisions. You see, our choices shape who we are, what we do, and where we will go. And they build on each other. We see that with Ruth. That she was able to become, in the lineage, the line of Jesus. Because of decisions, because of choices that she made. And sometimes when we make those decisions, a lot of times, we don't understand the downstream impact that they're going to have. We don't think about this when we make the first choice. Just small. It's not a big deal. But every choice that we make is important. It matters. And it impacts the ones following. That's why I want to ask you, what choices are you making today that will impact your tomorrow? It may seem incremental, it may seem kind of small, but what choices do you have to make? We read it earlier whenever the band was singing. But in Romans chapter 5, we see this incredible picture of the choice, the opportunity that we have to make. Being justified by faith, we can have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ. And I don't know what's going on in your life right now. I don't know what situation you find yourself in. If there are difficult decisions in front of you, if you're going through a really difficult time right now, what God doesn't ask us to do is to prepare days and the weeks ahead in the future. He asks you to be faithful in the small, and in the small, in the today, He'll continue to guide you toward your future. And we get so caught up in, God, what are you doing? What do you want to do in my life? Where do you want me to end up? We want to see the end game. We want to see where God is leading us to at a point. But He's not asking you to worry about that. He's not asking you to consider that right now. He's asking you to be faithful today. Because if you're faithful today, He will reward your tomorrow. As we're faithful to God in the moment, in the decisions that we make today, He will continue to work in our lives, to influence us, and to point us toward what He has for us in the future. And we don't know where that's going to lead. And while it seems like a small decision today, it can have a major impact tomorrow. And that goes for the good and the bad. When you think of a domino train, a line of dominoes, once one falls, they continue to go. When we start heading down a path that's negative, those dominoes will continue to fall. But what God says, if you will be faithful to me today, I will show you tomorrow. Tomorrow. I catch myself in this all the time. I keep thinking, well, God, there's a lot going on right now. I don't know what you want me to do. I don't know where you want me to go. I have 2 little girls. I have a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old. God, I don't know what I'm doing, and I don't know what to do. One is sassy as can be. Love her. God, show me tomorrow, because I don't know what to do today. And I'll catch myself in these different situations where I'm like, stop doing that. Quit. Don't you know? And I think, God, I want to be a good father, but I don't know what that means, what that looks like. I have a great relationship with my dad now, but he wasn't there whenever I was younger. Because of choices, because of decisions that he made that impacted his tomorrow. But what's incredible, and what we read about earlier in Romans chapter 5, is that we can have peace with God. So we're justified by Him, that if your dominoes start falling in the wrong direction, it's never too late to turn them around. God doesn't ask you to sulk over all the bad dominoes you've laid, the bad decisions you've made. He just wants you to pick up today and move toward what He has for you. That as we continue in our life, we don't know what tomorrow is going to hold. It might be heavy. And I think sometimes this is a picture. We want to see the end. I want to see where it's all headed. But you don't get there without this. The small. The decision that doesn't seem important. So I want to ask you, what choice, what decision do you need to make today? It's like, God, I'm going to trust you for the first time. God, I'm going to start heading towards you. I know that there's something on my mind that I just need to stop doing this. I need this to not be a part of my life. I've said this before, but sometimes whenever I want to get things right in my life, I decide to make this list of all the things that I'm going to start doing. I'm going to wake up at 4 in the morning. I'm going to exercise. I'm going to read my Bible. God's asking you to make one decision, one choice. It's going to lead to big impact. But you get to choose how you get there. With Ruth, we see that God does incredible things in her life because of a choice. And when we look at that, this one little choice she makes, it can have a big impact. That this little one can't knock that over. It does nothing. But God builds on the choices, the decisions that we make, the things that we do. Our independent choices may not seem like a big deal, but they can make a big impact. And so that's really, I just want you to leave remembering one thing. What one choice does God want you to be faithful in today? Because it'll lead you toward your tomorrow. Let's pray. God, thank you for today. Thank you for helping us so that our choices, the decisions that we make, they matter. They may seem minor today, but it can have a big impact tomorrow. God, I pray that you continue to work in our lives. Help us to see that each and every day. That today we have choices to make. We can choose to be faithful. Faithful to you, faithful to what you have for us. God, will you help us to see that, to know that, to understand that? In Jesus' name I pray.